Hey friends, before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to tell you about our collective's newest partner. Meet Contact Monkey. Employee engagement is at the forefront of organizational strategy now more than ever. Internal comms needs to step up and be the backbone of company culture as organizations adapt to a new way of work. Contact Monkey is the ideal solution to streamline your internal communications all from within your Outlook or Gmail inbox. With Contact Monkey, you can create beautiful email newsletters using a wide range of customizable email templates. Drive employee engagement by including pulse surveys, employee net promoter score, and anonymous comments to enable a two-way conversation with your employees. And send employee emails directly from your inbox to existing distribution list. Contact Monkey does all the hard work, so you can sit back and watch your employee insights pour into your Contact Monkey dashboard in real time. To try Contact Monkey's free demo, visit www.contactmonkey.com/ICPro. I'm Sarah Jackson. Welcome to Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. This season, we're closing the gap. I've tracked down the experts that can help us as internal communicators close the gap from where we are now to where we need to be. We're connecting the dots to drive value and lead from the inside out.
That real-time experience to employees as they would, in your personal life. Anytime you go on your mobile phone or when you go to a website, you expect to have the latest and greatest information at your fingertips. So how do we kind of match that experience of our personal life into the work life is jointly what we aspire to bring.
But if that vision isn't realized early on, then all these other more pressing priorities that are time sensitive will take precedence, but also understanding that balance between do some of the work for today and then do some of the work for tomorrow. Because at the end of the day, it's about that transition into the next phase of how we want to do our own jobs.
Today, we continue our journey within the industrial region around the southern shores of San Francisco Bay, California. With its intellectual center being the Silicon Valley, we are visiting with our new friends at VMware. Anthea, who is their Director of Digital Channels and Strategy within the Global Communications team, and Tiara, VMware's Digital Channel Specialist. Today, our conversation uncovers blind spots internal communicators face when innovating with IT, and these experts give us tips on how to navigate hard conversations with leadership. We're also going to learn how these two amazing women sustained excitement to bring a consumer experience to their employees among so many competing priorities. This and much more on today's show. When we are innovating, particularly with new digital tools or technology, IT is always involved. And again, with our listeners, this is not with all companies, but with some, this is an area where they want to close the gap. They want to work more better and efficiently with their IT department. Talk to me a bit about your partnership working with your IT department. I know in our prep call, you mentioned they were sort of a non-traditional strategic partner, which sounds going to be dreamy for a lot of our listeners. Because I know sometimes they butt heads with their IT department, but I would love to hear about your partnership with IT.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely would say that I believe that we have one of the best IT teams in the industry. We work really closely, and honestly, they are our strategic IT partners when it comes to delivering new experiences for our employees. And when I say that they are our strategic partners, I look to our IT organization as a key stakeholder. As we are looking at new technologies, new vendors, new applications, and they always have a seat on the table when it comes to that exploration phase and into our deployment phase. So certainly kind of beyond traditional IT from a support and services perspective, but from a communications, collaboration, and experience perspective. I think what's very, very exciting is that our IT teams and us have very similar shared vision. And it's all about ensuring that we are providing our colleagues with the best tools and technologies to do their best work. And the same is true with our communication channels internally, is that we want to make sure that we are delivering news and information and updates to our employees to help them be productive, to help them stay informed, delivering that real-time experience to employees as they would, in your personal life. Anytime you go on your mobile phone or when you go to a website, you expect to have the latest and greatest information at your fingertips. So how do we kind of match that experience of our personal life into the work life is jointly what we aspire to bring to our employees.
Well, and I think you say it a key thing I don't want our listeners to miss here is you had mentioned IT being brought in the exploration phase. I think a lot of us misstep in that we love this new tool and we want it and we're already decided, we're in deployment, and then we call IT, and we should have brought them in at the very, very beginning, like you said, to establish a shared vision. I think that's such a key tip. Tiara, tell me, with you saying that you're kind of new in this role, what was it like your experience in working with such an amazing IT department there at VMware?
Sure, of course. So it was really interesting and really cool for me to be able to actually work with the IT team because coming in, I didn't know what kind of role this would be necessarily, if I would be, solely working on the business side or if I could dip into more of the technical side as well. And that's something that I actually already had an interest for. So when I first met with IT, it was when we were building out our intranet. And so that was a huge project that we've been working on. And I got a taste for how you have so many steps in a process to make a project really come to life in terms of the planning stages and then actually developing it out and then doing testing, QA, UAT, and everything. All these new terms for me that I had never actually learned coming out of school. So it was a lot of learning on the job, which was really, really great for me. And our IT team is tremendous in the sense that whenever I had questions, they would always, be quick to answer and fill me in as if they knew that I had some things to learn, but they want to also teach me their language and the way that they work and the processes that they have in place. So I've been really grateful for just the understanding that the IT team has given me when they knew that I was, new on the job and had a lot to kind of take in. What I would say it's been an interesting dynamic is kind of sitting in the middle of comms and IT, both trying to understand from the organization that I sit in, comms, what are we trying to build towards? What does the vision look like? What are our priorities? And then trying to articulate that to IT, working with them as a strategic partner, and kind of really sitting in this role of going back and forth and trying to make sure that both teams have shared visions that are being met and that are being understood across functionally. But really, it's been a tremendous opportunity, and I think that for all communicators, if we work so hand in hand that I don't see how you could have a comms org that isn't engaging actively day in and day out with IT and trying to understand how it all kind of comes together. It's like, in order to really build that next evolution of what global comms, at least to us, looks like, we had to have a strong relationship in place with IT to begin with.
Well, and I'm going to push just a little further on this issue, just because it's always such it's a valuable conversation to have about working with IT, because anybody that's going to be closing the gap, as you stated, they've got to have that relationship. Tiara, when you look back, now, what do you wish, day one you would have known about working with IT that you now know right now that you're like, oh man, if I could have gone back to my younger self, I would have warned myself of this, that might be helpful insight to some of our listeners that might just be starting off trying to develop these, better relationships with IT?
I feel like, being so new to this, I have a lot of learnings that are really valuable. But I would say there's two things that really come to mind, and I'm guilty of this. I know it. But the first thing is to understand what's really a priority and something that needs to be flagged, because there's always going to be, from a global comms lens, a million things that we would love to check off the list from day one. But things take time to develop and they take time to make sure that we get it right. Um, and I think that in the beginning, when I first started working with IT, everything was the biggest problem ever, and everything had to be flagged, and everyone needed to stop what they were doing to kind of cater to my needs. And if I had just taken time to kind of understand that process of how IT works, I would understand that they have, a bunch of things on their plate as well, not just with other teams, but even within the project that we're working on. And I need to understand that there's kind of, a hierarchy of the things that can be worked on first, and to really understand what gets prioritized and why and how much bandwidth the team has, things like that. So that's the first thing I would say. The other thing I wish I had kind of taken more time to understand early on was the testing process. This so much more than before, I'm realizing that there's so much benefit to really documenting all of the testing that you do to make sure that whatever you've developed is working, in every lens, in every perspective. And so just taking that time to have good documentation, have all the approvals in place, sign off from multiple parties, is really, really important to making sure that you've spot checked, or not even spot checked, but thoroughly evaluated how well the thing that you've developed works.
Okay, we're off to a good start here in part 2 of our series, but I want to remind you of our long-term partner Circle here. Now, they have a new product called Circle Broadcast. No matter what size your department may be or how it's structured, there's an internal comm solution that can grow with you. Circle Broadcast gives you the channels that are most important to your team's current and future strategy. Whether your main employee touch points are email inboxes, SharePoint, or a mobile app, you can select the channels that work for you. And if you ever decide to add another connected channel, it's just a click away. That's right, there's no need for another IT integration. Just head on over to circle.com/ICP. That's CERKL/ICP to learn more. Now, the folks at Circle have made it super easy. No matter how complicated your organization gets, collaboration across all channels is simple with Broadcast. One more real quick thing. Hey, thanks to our listeners who've taken the time to rate and review our podcast. These reviews help us iterate. It's part of the reason why we shortened this season's episode to be more bite-sized. Help our new listeners find us by leaving a rating and a review today. Now let's jump in as I push back on Anthea and Tiara to give us some practical steps they took to socialize their new vision. And we close our conversation with their biggest lessons. I love the ending in this episode because both women are so vulnerable to share what they would go back and tell their younger selves. Let's jump back in. That is such a good tip. I love that. I'm so glad I asked. I'm so glad you answered.
Of course.
All right. So it feels like that both of you, I feel like I'm talking to the Wonder Twins here. So because we get this holistic high level picture, from Anthea, then we dive in, maybe on some of these project level things, with you, Tiara. So this, question again is to both of you. What are some of the steps that you took or that you continue to take, to have everyone from, leadership all the way down to the employees realize this new vision? I mean, there's got to be some, like I said, I want to close the gap for some people and have some real concrete things. So, Anthea, from a high level maybe perspective, um, what are some steps that you continue to take now to make sure that everybody, from the top down to the last employee realizes this vision that you're trying to push through?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think there are multiple steps in terms of how we approach this. I think one of the areas that we certainly work on, and as a company, is that we always take iterative steps with our projects, not necessarily going 100% on and in our deployment. So it's not necessarily a one big bang approach, but to iterate and improve along the way. And we also follow a agile methodology with our projects. So how we like to approach this typically is to do pilots with our initiatives. So if I were to give you an example, with our corporate intranet, we built our intranet within IT. To give you an example, one of our core projects that we released about a year ago was our intranet. And it was an intranet that we were very proud to build and deliver in-house. And if you can imagine, an intranet is of a really huge scale, and there's so many different areas to consider, from content management to the web experience to mobile, to metrics, and design. So instead of having to wait 2-3 years to release the project, we decided to go through the iterative approach, where we started with just launching an element of the intranet, gather the feedback from our employees, and then iterate and improve. And then we take those learnings and we apply that to the next phase of the project. And yeah, so in general, that's kind of how we think about kind of taking steps for our project. And we do that pretty frequently across the board with all our channels.
That's great. Tiara, you got anything to add on a project level on this question?
Yeah, so for me, I'm working a lot with communicators directly. So it could be communicators within our own organization, or we even have communicators who aren't a part of our direct team, but they sit within their own BUs and act as communicators on the behalf of the group or a leader themselves. So a lot of times I'm helping from a communicator to an employee perspective. And the way I see this is that individually, like even if it was our entire org, probably we wouldn't be able to reach every single employee, as Anthea stated, and make sure that they fully understand the vision. But we can enable these communicators to go out, and once they understand, they can kind of spread that to their own teams or their leaders, and kind of do some communicating that way to help us, kind of in a waterfall effect, start from the top vision, and then have that flow out to the rest of the company, and so that these other teams can understand what our vision is, what our goals are, within global communications. So I start with stating the value or the opportunity that we have at hand, and get people excited about it. Like, this is how it's going to make not only your job easier, but this is how it's going to help bring up engagement with the people that you're communicating with. And so I really kind of start from that lens. This is where we can get to. And then after that, it's a lot of meeting directly one-on-one or one in small groups to reiterate those ideas, and then applying specific use cases for those communicators' jobs specifically. So whatever work they're doing, I always try to tie the vision back directly to that, because that helps to build a visual for those individuals that they can then take back to their own teams.
That is so good. And then are you regularly checking in, or how do you kind of keep it sustain the excitement level? Because with change, I know you talk about as entrepreneurs, and you iterate, and some folks are wired for innovation. Others see a change and are like, oh, this feels like a bunch of more work. So, uh, you know, I know it couldn't have been all roses on some of these things that you guys have pushed through, but is there any insights that you can offer, when if internal communicators are going to go down this road of innovating and I love the steps that you laid out, Tiara, but any pitfalls or, how do you sustain people's excitement and energy for the change?
Really, what I see amongst communicators is there's initial excitement, and then what happens after that is there's competing priorities. So, of course, all of this ties in together, but if someone doesn't understand the broader vision and how it plays into almost all the parts of their role, which is what we're hoping to do is really do work that applies across the board uh, for all of our communicators. But if that vision isn't realized early on, then all these other more pressing priorities that are time sensitive will take precedence. And then what we have to do is we have to kind of go back, and whether that's a meeting or if that's identifying, oh, this is maybe a challenge that you're having right now, this is really what we're hoping to get to and how it's going to better your job. So it's kind of giving them those little nuggets every once in a while. And that can be done through setting up regular meetings, through email announcements. Sometimes an email is just digestible. It's also sometimes them coming to us as well and saying, oh, I need help with this. And then that's another time where we can inject that vision again and say, oh, well, this is what we're planning for the future. This is what we're heading towards. Let me help you out right now. But, we're going to hopefully get to a place where this is going to become really easy and easily facilitated.
Anthea, do you have something you want to add on this note?
Yeah, I completely agree with Tiara. We work really closely with our communication team to help us realize the vision, but we also work very closely across the organization with our digital channels, as many content contributors sit within the different business units. And one thing we strive to do is to ensure that we host regular governance meetings with our contributors to ensure that we keep them up to date with the projects that we are working on, the enhancements that we're delivering. And it's always kind of an outside in too, where we gather the feedback from our users, be it kind of positive feedback, negative feedback, or just kind of ideas that are generated, and we take that in, and we ensure that we're always looking at these ideas and figuring out what are some of the things that we could help them do better with their projects through the channels. How do they get better engagement with their content, and work on prioritizing things that has maximum impact. I think that would be one thing that is that we do constantly to ensure that it's not just kind of ideas that we generate, but it's very kind of feedback driven.
I want to go back to something that Tiara said, when you go down this road to try to inspire a vision. And I love some of these really great inside tips of how to keep moving things forward. But if I do have competing priorities, I know Tiara and we met at a conference, and you get so excited and you come back and you want to do all these things. And then it's like, oh, I got to get the email out from the CEO or whatever. And then I'm under the water again. And so before I go down this road, is there any blind spots that you can see when internal communicators go down this road that might prevent them from innovating that you would warn them about? I want to speak to this a little bit because I want them, again, this is all about closing the gap. How do we finally get out of the competing priorities and being underwater? What are some blind spots that you've
Mhm.
seen that we can maybe have a little bit better self-awareness of, um, so that we can get into that innovation mode?
Yeah, so I would say that the biggest thing I see that kind of holds people back is wanting to stay in a safe space. So there's always going to be some established processes that we're used to, they're tried and true. We know that they work to the extent that we know that they work. But with something new, we don't have kind of that same data all the time, from at least from internally, right? because we haven't maybe tested it out, and we're trying something new. But that's what becomes exciting, is trying to push towards something different and keep things fresh, so that we can build up that engagement that we keep discussing with our employees, especially, or even with our external audiences as well. And so that's what I would say is kind of the biggest blind spot, or the thing that prevents innovation. But then to get out of that, we really have to dedicate some time, to, yes, getting the job done that's happening today, but then thinking about, okay, what do I want the next year to look like, or even just the next quarter or next couple of years, however far out you want to plan. You have to take some time to sit down and, get excited about all of the various projects that are in place, the things that other teams are working on. And for me, this is something that I find huge, not being a direct communicator, but also understanding that balance between do some of the work for today and then do some of the work for tomorrow. Because at the end of the day, it's about that transition into the next phase of how we want to do our own jobs, right? How we want to communicate to our employees and what's really important to them.
That's so good. I love that. And, you talk about the fear of the unknown. And I think, one of the things that I get scared of, and that I hear some of our listeners get scared of, is how to, we don't know how leadership's going to react to this. And so, you know, part of innovating is knowing how to navigate those hard conversations with so many different departments, leadership, and you must have, Anthea, particularly being there 13 years, have had to have some hard conversations. How do you navigate those hard conversations with so many different departments that need to be involved to help make the vision a reality? Any tips on having those hard conversations?
Yeah, I won't necessarily say a lot of the conversations are hard. I think a lot of the conversations that we do have are conversations of education, conversations of delivering or painting a picture for our stakeholders, so that we can help them kind of visualize what the opportunities are for them, and for their departments. So I think that is the first piece, is that, just to have a lot more empathy around the work that they do, gain more knowledge about the work that they do, so that when we go into conversations about change or the potential of change, we are speaking to them in the context that they understand. So not throwing out any kind of IT jargon or certain terms that sometimes actually pulls people away because they're not close to this business, but to be able to simplify it in a way that makes sense to them, so that they could be an adopter of the change. And I think it's also, a big part is also kind of just the altitude of what we're presenting to the different groups. Presenting to a VP of IT or a VP of HR, it's very different from presenting to somebody within global communications. So how do we contextualize what we're trying to do that makes the most sense to that individual based on who they are, where they are, and what do you think that they want to hear? And also anticipate the questions that they may ask. So I strongly believe in just being really prepared in our presentation, doing a good amount of homework, and also, arm yourself with the people who may help you answer the questions that you don't have answers to. So if it's going to a meeting with somebody senior in HR, who is my partner within HR communications, or somebody who does HR operations, that could kind of jointly present to these executives.
So, Anthea, I'm going to ask this question before we get to our last question. If you could go back to yourself on day one at your job at VMware and tell that younger woman insight that you wish you would have known, or maybe a warning, hey, before you walk in that door, what would you have told yourself 13 years ago?
Yeah, I think, 13 years ago, it's a long time, and it's also a different part of my career. But if I were to give advice to somebody who was at that time at that age, or at that phase of their career. And I would say that, be confident of yourself and to be truthful in terms of what your capabilities are, or where you believe there are areas that you like to work on. I think sometimes, and I recall, because when I moved to Silicon Valley, I moved from Asia to the Bay Area without a tech background and going into the technology space. So it's a huge transition for me from a career perspective. And perhaps one of the things I would have told myself is to really learn about the space, learn about different technologies, learn about the Bay Area, and keep myself informed with the industry at large.
Okay, well, last question, since this is all about uncovering the formula, the elements that go into innovation. If you have any last minute tips or advice to encourage our listeners who are going to go down the road, particularly with the time of history that we're in, it's such a great time. They're positioned so well now with everything going on to innovate. How do you make people see what is actually possible? Any last minute thoughts or tips?
I would say don't be afraid to explore new ideas. No idea is a bad idea. I think that only helps you build up your arsenal of opportunities, with helping shape the experience within your organization. Your idea that you have today that may be shut down could be an idea that would be really sought after in a few months. So keep that kind of momentum going. Don't be afraid of being rejected, and just constantly go out and see what's out there. Because your personal experience fuels your professional experience.
I love it. Tiara, you got anything for us that you want to say last minute here?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that at the end of the day, everyone is a very visual learner. I think that even the most technical of people will appreciate a good graphic that kind of paints the picture of what could be. So whenever you have the option to, kind of put together a timeline or put together a journey of where you really hope for global communications to go, then do it. Because like we always say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you can visualize something, synthesize it, make it as simple as possible for people to understand. And that's when you can start to kind of get to that second level where you start to drill down into more details. But start with simple, start with visuals, and then, kind of start to build your way from there.
Well, I can't thank you both for helping simplify the innovation process for our listeners. If our listeners did want to connect with you, are you open for them reaching out to you on LinkedIn if they did have a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
Yes, that would be great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We look forward to staying connected with you and hearing all the great and wonderful innovative things that you continue to do there at VMware to achieve that superior audience experience.
Thank you for having us.
Next week, we continue our journey through the Silicon Valley to tech giant Google. We'll be diving into how their internal comms team measures the effectiveness of their internal comms efforts. Now, don't forget to download today's resource guide that accompanies this series at internalcommspro.com/show notes. Stay with us as our journey to closing the gap continues next week.
Internal Comms Pro podcast is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our theme music is Big Vision by Purple Planet Music. Don't forget to visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes for our free resource guides. Thank you for listening.